Manoj, if we fast forward to 2030, what do you think a future-proof data organization would look like?
Love this question. Manoj,
You're like the forward-thinking data leader here.
So I think I am a very aspirational person. Right? Everything that I was talking about to the Shravya's question earlier, I would still hold that, right? But for 2030, I would take it one notch higher. So in my opinion, the best of data orgs are going to be super boring in a good way. Why do I say that?
On the podcast today, we have Manoj Mohan. He was formerly head of engineering of data and AI platforms at Intuit. He was previously a senior engineering leader at Meta, Cloudera, and Apple. In this episode, we talked about the hard lessons from early data warehouse failures, why the platform as a product mindset is critical for long-term success in data engineering, why LLMs are like Formula One cars, and how the 3Gs prevent them from crashing. What a future-proof data org might look like by 2030. Be sure to subscribe to Data Neighbor in your favorite podcast app and YouTube. Let's dive into our conversation with Manoj Mohan. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Data Neighbor podcast with Hai, Shravya, and Sean. Today we have Manoj Mohan joining us. Welcome, Manoj.
Hello, good to meet you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Hey Manoj, so excited to have you. I think we didn't have this flavor in detail, so I'm very excited to touch upon all different topics that we'll have today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting and definitely a cool one. So before we get into the topics of today, Manoj, could you maybe quickly walk through the audience, your background, what led you to where you are today?
Sure. So first of all, I'm a seasoned engineering leader, have been working with the data space, with data ML AI space for probably over 2 decades now. So I started my career mostly as a data engineer, long time back. I would say data and database engineer. And slowly but steadily, I was building data pipelines day in, day out. And my fascination for data continued to increase by the day. And that's how I started venturing out more into data warehousing, or data marts, and then slowly started looking into analytics and business intelligence, and the ability to derive value for an organization by mining through the data was a huge eye-opener for me. And subsequently, I ventured out into distributed systems and machine learning and all of that because of the fascination for data. And in the process, I worked for a handful of different companies, all who derive a ton of value from data, building their business with mining through the data and things like that. So that's my background.
Cool. And so you also worked at, I guess you kind of glossed over it. You kind of worked at the logos. We call them the logos here. The tech giants, the Apples and the Facebooks and previously Intuit as well. And then you were doing kind of like data and also like AI platform. Was there any sort of defining moments in your career that kind of led you to places like that in the past?
Yeah. So, one of the most fascinating things for me has been just to get the exposure to how each of these big logos or big companies operate, right? The engineering values and how they leverage those engineering values at each of these companies is, I would say, a pole apart. Is hugely different from how each one operates. And that's been a fascinating learning for me. Now, to come back to your question, I would say, some of my early exposure and learnings, I would say, started from a biotech company. We were in the process of building out a massive data warehouse, and we were going after some of the best of tools, best of technology. We had the budget, we had everything going. So we did a fabulous job in kind of conceptualizing and designing the warehouse and getting all of that in place. However, what happened is when we truly started moving that to our production environment, the whole system at real world scale did not really scale. It choked, unlike anything that we had planned for. So in that context, I think was one of the first important lessons for me. I would say the lesson was more so around humility and scalability, because you think that, you got everything right, and you obviously did not get everything right. And that learning, I think, was also a principle for me, because, now I anchor all of my teams to one, gradually ramp up for production traffic with, with canary or progressive canary and other techniques that also prevents any kind of adverse customer impact, especially for critical product workflows. And also, the other important thing there is, focus on the real world customer outcomes. And, you want to kind of gradually ramp up iteratively for all of those customer outcomes was also an important part of the learning. So that, I would say, was early on in the journey. Maybe another one, if I can share, I would say would be the, back at Facebook, when I used to be at Facebook. I know now it's called Meta, but I still remember it as Facebook. I saw how, small and scrappy teams would deploy advanced machine learning models, be it for newsfeed, be it for other products that literally impacted billions of people. And all of that work would be turned around in a span of a couple of weeks. And that actually showed me the power of, I would say, velocity as well as trust. So one philosophy there that I learned is, if you give teams the autonomy and remove the friction or the blocker points, they can surprise you with the pace of innovation. And that, again, has been a massive, massive learning from when I look back. So those are the two I would share. Yeah.
Nice. I think we had a prior guest on, Robert Chang, who had like a triple career pivots. Like he was a data scientist and then a PM and then a software engineer working on data platform, I think.
Okay.
And then he also said like the biggest realization for him, like through all these journey, is how hard it is to actually build something scalable. It's like everything is about scalability. It's not the pixels. It's not the feature. It's scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I echo that. I would say even cross-functional collaboration, we sometimes undermine the extent of impact that it can bring. One of the philosophies we do is we always start with a customer problem statement, and that customer problem statement map to the North Star metrics of a product, and what baseline KPIs we use to measure kind of quantifies the problem that we are solving for. And true cross-functional collaboration can actually work wonders in how you solve that problem across all the dimensions. So again, we undermine it sometimes as engineers. We think code is the most important thing. There are a ton of things that could add value beyond code, right? Yeah.
Especially for data engineering and the engineering aspect, right? Because if you look at traditional engineering, like software engineering or front end, back, it's fairly more straightforward to the product. Data itself, it's not, I mean, in AI world, it's fully straightforward, but in a traditional product standpoint, data is not the front and center. It's in the background a bit, because you need logging, you need to understand and then go. And then behind that is data engineering, right? Even more behind that. So that mapping that you just told, to have a project of like for the engineering, to know what the two levels up, right? Product and impact business, it's like so far down, you're like way buried deep in it. So that's, I would say, is a huge difference, having a leader who could help see through that entire tunnel and, focus on stuff that actually moves thing up at the top.
Yeah, and yeah, very, very valid point, Shravya. I think one of the things that we have followed at Intuit as well as Meta is what we refer to as the triad or the quad leadership model. So everything from, your product roadmap to your product backlog to quantifying what impact each one of those backlog items brings to the table is collectively owned by, I would say, a person representing data, a person from product management, a person from user experience lead, right? And a person from software engineering. So depending on your workflows, these 3 or 4 people collectively have to cover for each other and look at 360-degree view of that particular product to ensure that you are holistically solving for your customers, your product pain points, your product engagement, stickiness, revenue, all of it, right? So it's a very different ball game as compared to thinking in silo about your data pipeline or in silo about a dashboard or a KPI, right? Now you have to conceptualize, okay, how are you going to truly innovatively come up with that creative product workflow that is going to mesmerize your customer, and then think through about what KPIs you're going to solve for, or what KPIs are you going to create that's going to truly measure the effectiveness of that particular product workflow, right? So the more and more you kind of get into all of these things, it's truly fascinating because at the end of it, we are all in the business of solving problems, creating efficiency for our customers.
Love that. Like the MVP style, right?
Yeah,
Have a minimum viable product. It's like a puzzle and figure out the parts of the puzzle and then go solve for building each of them rather than going from the back end to the
yeah,
front. Yeah. Yeah. It also helps other parts too, so much, not just engineering, data
correct,
engineering, right?
correct,
It
correct.
helps for data science. It helps for reporting. Like if there are analytical engineering or reports, it helps actually with the PRD of the document as well, like what exact user features that are needed that helps this. So it helps everyone to
Yeah.
go through that, the final product and what maps towards that. Yeah.
And it also helps break down the knowledge silos, right? As your enterprise, as your organization grows, you have all these verticals. The data engineering team is looking at their silo. Data science team is experimenting with a ton of different models. Your software engineers are experimenting with, product workflows and user experience, right? So it creates more and more of these silos. The more you have this collective combined ownership end to end, that binds us all together on the right priorities, and all of you work together to come up with the most cohesive approach, that's going to add value. So yeah.
Hey, Manoj, in that vein, certainly in the very established companies like Facebook and, let's call them like the logos again, the logos, like they have really good practices. They have all the best like processes and procedures in place. How about for companies that aren't quite there yet in terms of, their perhaps data practice or even how to kind of work with the data team? So when you mentioned the triads or the quad square of representatives, so let's say like if an organization isn't even in the operating kind of mindset that for example, hey, we need to really think through everything from the start versus let's go build. So a manifestation of it could be the impact is unclear, the true north metric is not quite clear, like that's even the target audience is like kind of like, hey, we'll figure it out as we go kind of thing. What advice do you have for organizations that are kind of like currently, quote unquote, stuck in that in that mode of working?
Yeah, great question. So again, the answer, largely depends on several different factors, including the maturity of your systems, platform, product, the maturity of your engineering culture, engineering practices, all of that, right? So it'll be hard to say one solution that fits all, but to be more pragmatic, the way I would approach it is we have, in the past through my work with startups and other smaller companies, we have tried to come up with different product development rubrics for engineers. So for example, in one of my past companies, we used to follow the model of some engineers are going to be product specialists, some engineers are going to be framework specialists or platform engineers, and some engineers are going to be just deep down into building modules and things like that. Now, why so? If somebody wants to be a product specialist rubric, then it means they're going to spend lesser fraction of their time coding, but they're also going to be working closely with product managers to understand the nature of the problem and do ideation, come up with the right requirements and all of that. So in that sense, a product specialist is playing a slightly covering for a lot more breadth if you don't have all of these different functions, with the right capacity. So that's what a product specialist engineer would do. Whereas a framework engineer is going to go deep down into, let's say, if you're building a streaming platform or if you're building a data persistence platform for different types of data, then that person is going to focus purely on getting the right architecture, the right integration pattern, solving for all the choking points and things like that. So having those well-defined rubrics with setting the right expectations and collaborating and doubling down across the organization is also a recipe for success. Like in some instances in the past, I would double down for product managers when we have, some capacity shortage for product managers. And similarly, we would have some product managers who double down as the engineering lead when we have a shortage of engineering leads for not so risky project initiatives and things like that. So it's about that true collaborative spirit, that boundary-less leadership, and staying truly focused on the customer pain point that you're trying to move the needle. These are the factors that kind of pan out, in my opinion.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. So it's like people kind of cover each other and got it. Okay, cool. Awesome. Let me see. So Shavi, you're about to say something.
No, I was going to. So maybe orthogonal or slightly related topic. So the different types of roles, right? You just mentioned data science and data engineering. So there's a new role that's coming up called analytical engineering. So in the presence of analytical engineering, who are majorly basically doing the engineering part of reporting, not just a typical data analyst reporting or a data science or a junior data science reporting, they're majorly trying to build data products where there is quality engineering in how reports are built, how the business layer data pipeline logic is built. In that world, data engineering gets even more buried, right? It is even more buried where probably data engineering takes care of the core infra of how the entire, the raw level data takes care. So in cases like that, how do you see it still be, I mean, be linked to the top line business and top line business metric, because everyone that's dealing with the business is in those layers: data scientists, like product manager, software engineer, and analytical engineer. They are in that pod. Data engineering comes one layer below, right? So have you had teams like that? And in those cases, what have you seen?
Yeah, great question. If I look at 10 years back, right? And here is my experience, right? Data engineering used to be more of a service offering or a service organization catering to the needs of business, where business comes and tells you, hey, you know what, my KPI I need to measure exactly with this business logic. Can you build a pipeline for it and things like that, right? So that was data engineering was more on a reactive front, where they get the instructions and you're just building or codifying a pipeline that scales for the volume and things like that, right? But when I look into the future, I think that's going to become more and more of an extinct way of functioning, because that's absolutely not going to scale, right? The data footprint will continue to quadruple or grow by 10x, which means the variations of pipelines in a service mode is going to explode over time. And building a pipeline is easier, but maintaining it for its lifespan is going to be even more harder. So you are not going to be able to hire enough data engineers who can build siloed pipelines and maintain it for every single product, every single KPI. That's almost not going to happen, in my opinion, right? So the more scalable way to think about it is, or in an ideal world, the way I would think about it is, one, you spoke about analytical engineering, right? I would challenge that with, how do you enable or how do you start thinking of the guardrails around self-serve analytics, right? Can we think of the enterprise having some sort of platform capability, some sort of self-serve capability, where all of your entities, all of your relevant KPI, all of your relevant dimensions are exposed for all of your ongoing fixed format reporting and dashboarding? Every analyst, and forget about analysts, maybe product managers should be able to go look at that KPI, pull it, dissect it based on specific dimensions, apply the specific time granularity, and they should be able to save it as a preference for a dashboard. So even the function of analytical engineering, there is scope for you to automate if you think it right and if you think it along the platform centric mindset, right?
Okay.
Now, the similar principle is what I would apply for data engineers or data engineering, right? So let's say if your company, it deals with n different domains, meaning, let's say you deal with banking data, you deal with consumer app data, you deal with insurance data, and so on. Now, that domain is going to have a finite set of entities. And those finite set of entities will have some set of sub-entities. Now, your ingest process to process all of this data and curate all of this data, if you kind of build it through a common ingestion framework or a platform utility kind of approach, then all of that gets processed, right? And then if you leverage some of the data transformation tools like dbt and things like that and build the right lineage and governance on top of it, then you could even automate and give that to the hands of business users, which could be your operations users, which could be your analysts, which could be your PMs when needed. So you've kind of built a lot more resilient and a lot more scalable framework, right? In this approach, you probably have, let's say, 20 different pipelines pointing to 20 different entities across 5 different domains, instead of having 100 different pipelines for 5 different variations of KPIs, just because those KPIs evolved over time and things like that, right? So I know I'm giving a very long answer, but in principle, the way I would approach to your problem is one, think with a platform-centric mindset, be it analytics, be it data ingestion, whatever. Even for data science, think through on the guardrails, think through on the governance, think through on the citation and things like that. All of that would be a framework aspect because you don't want every single data scientist to solve for it. You want to
Yeah.
kind of build it once, and every model leveraged by every data scientist should seamlessly plug into that governance, that guardrails and things like that, right? So if you apply that platform-centric mindset, I think things will be a lot more manageable. Things will be a lot more scalable, and and you're not going to be constrained by the number of engineers or the number of hours that can be dedicated to reactively solve for a KPI or a dashboard or a pipeline. So let me pause there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense. And I was smiling a bit in between, thinking, how will LLMs change all of this? Because you were talking about analytical engineering might not be even needed if you actually have the right framework, right platform where probably right ingestion and tooling to
Yeah.
support, and then analytical engineering could we wouldn't need that layer. But now that I'm thinking of it, how do you think? Probably we are jumping ahead
So
in discussing LLMs right now, but just curious.
yeah, some of the same things that I told earlier are very much applicable for LLMs in an enterprise, right?
Uh-huh.
The way I would put it is, if I use an analogy, I would say that LLMs in an enterprise are along the lines of a Formula One car for your team, right? It can truly accelerate on velocity, but if you don't think through on building, let's say, the right streets, the right guardrails, or the right pit crew for your Formula One car, you are prone to create accidents, right? So the true way to unlock the acceleration from LLMs in an enterprise, I would say, is when you think about the governance, when you think about the lineage, when you think about the safety guardrails, so that your Formula One car can actually finish to the race line every lap, every time you get it out for a race, right? So that's the way to think about it. I think the whole industry is talking about responsible AI and and then building those guardrails, because you do not want to just take a foundational model from the market, deploy it for your context, and expect it to magically solve all your problems. That's absolutely not going to happen, right? So all the heavy lifting or all the platform centric aspects you have to invest, you have to think through, and make sure that does not translate to an adverse customer impact. Because if you do it, the trust is broken, and then you're not going to get the customer to, leverage your LLMs at any point in time. So that's how I see it.
Love the analogy. I'm going to remember that next time when I talk about using the Formula One car and the pit crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
That's
ahead. You were saying
That's
something.
awesome. Manoj, can you I think this is a really great segue into, can you talk about the different aspects that needs to be done right in order for kind of like your proactive operations to succeed, and then also like just being able to kind of, like not be in a mode where we're throwing bodies at the problem. So for example, you mentioned governance, data lineage, guardrails. How do we think about it in terms of, in practice, what needs to be done?
So is your question more around data engineering or is it more around LLM?
Let's do data engineering and then we'll
Okay.
get to LLMs.
Okay, great. So I think for data engineering, I mean, largely all of that I would say is still very much applicable. I think governance is important, lineage is important, having the right audit trail is important, instrumentation is important. Yeah. So all of these I would say are very much applicable. The only additional lens I would put is, the way I was talking about the platform centric mindset, right? Think of the platform centric mindset or platform as a product mindset, right? I think that is where you can truly bring the best of value, best of efficiency, for your organization with data engineering. If teams continue to operate in the service model, in the reactive model, I think that is going to fall apart. That's going to choke someday or the other, because you're going to lose track of KPIs. You're going to lose track of the different flavors of KPIs and things like that. And I've seen it happen in some of my past organizations. In the interest of moving fast, you give the autonomy to every single data engineering team. And some of these are parallel data engineering teams catering only to the needs of a particular product. So they go ahead and they don't buy into some of the existing KPIs, because that existing KPI solves for the entire ecosystem. So they don't want to look at the entire ecosystem. So they take that particular pipeline, they clone it, they add an additional business logic specific to that particular product group. They come up with a new KPI. And eventually, when all of this rolls back up to the leadership, they see a dozen different flavors of the KPI, and there's no way you can reconcile all of this. And then data engineering organizations are scrambling to figure out what's the right metric for the right context, for the right product workflow, and things like that. So bringing that product centric mindset, I would say, is very, very, very important, because if you have a company and if you have 4 different products or 6 different products, every product is going to have a finite set of workflows, right? Now, for those finite set of workflows, if you are thinking along the lines of, okay, what kind of churn do I see within that workflow? What kind of engagement do I see? How do I improve the stickiness? How do I increase adoption? If I look at my monthly active users or daily active users, and how is that trending? So these are a finite set of KPIs that you can build and for the lifespan of that product, right? So that's the distinction in my opinion. So treat data engineering with the same rigor of a platform/product mindset. And what do I mean by that? Just like a real software product, have an owner identified, have a roadmap, have documentation, have SLA, have contracts, have guardrails, have the right instrumentation. All of those, bells and whistles that constitute a typical software product. You should have that for a data science model, a data engineering pipeline, or even your data objects, right? Because if you're storing data in a table, that's also the equivalent of a product, in my opinion, because it's got a contract. How is that contract going to scale and evolve over time? Do you have schema evolution, et cetera, et cetera? So that's how I would look at it for data engineering. Now, if I talk about the second part of your question, the way I would think about it, I can probably simplify it a lot better. So I keep a recipe, what I call as the 3 Gs for LLM. The 3 Gs stand for ground it, guard it, and govern it, right? So if you can plan for these 3 Gs, then the LLMs will no longer be constrained with being a shiny new toy, and instead it can actually start moving all your real world business metrics. What do I mean by ground it? Every time the LLM is fetching you some kind of output, make sure you have the model pointed to the sources of truth, and cite them, right? Because if you ground it to cite it every single time, and if that's what you ship as a practice, then you're not going to see wrong answers. Or if you end up seeing some amount of wrong answers, and if you bake in a human feedback loop right in that flow, the user could give you feedback and you could enhance the model to avoid that from happening, right? And it also increases the trustworthiness from a user standpoint because they're not at the mercy of LLM showing whatever it can show. And the user doesn't have to double guess, hey, did the LLM get it right or did the LLM hallucinate? So
Mhm.
right now you're kind of exposing, creating transparency around what the LLM brings as an outcome and why it brought as an outcome. And all of this is within the context of an enterprise, right? Because your enterprise documentation could be out of date, your Jira system might have incorrect Jiras, your knowledge base might not reflect all of the latest and greatest updates. So all of that you're kind of able to solve for in eroding the trust of what the LLM is going to bring to the table. The second one, guard it, I would say, is basically build or bake in privacy by design right from the word go, right?
Mm.
Because you're going to have, depending on the domain, depending on the vertical, you would have sensitive data, data that is PHI, PII, you don't want some of it to be exposed and that could create its own set of problems. So guard with privacy first approach. So make sure you have masking logic, make sure you have, minimization routines that expose only the relevant data, the insensitive data for LLMs to act upon or parse upon and things like that, right? So that's the second part of it. And the third one is governing it with, the right fairness metrics, the right audit trails, having the right
Mm.
scorecards built for what the AI is doing, cost per answer, accuracy scores, having regression based on a golden set of records that covers for all your use cases, all of that, right? So that's how I would look at it.
Got it. That's pretty cool. If we rewind back kind of like 5 minutes ago, I like the way that you talked about the data engineering platform aspect, where it's I've never kind of described it that way, but like the way that you described it is makes a whole lot of sense. It's almost like shared services. Like you don't reinvent everything. Like
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
build a new product or whatever, you
Good.
use the same guidelines for how to ingest data, how to transform the data, how to surface it, all that kind of stuff. Versus if we build a mobile product, then you have another kind of like completely different instance. If you build a web app, that's a completely new instance. That's equivalent to like, hey, you have a different database for every single one of these different things, and then somehow you have to magically kind of reconcile them at the end of the day. That would be crazy. That mindset. And how it extends to LLMs too is pretty fascinating. And so in that LLM kind of like world that you just described, is that a prerequisite for any enterprise to kind of like, before they can even use LLMs to, like to be the brain of whatever product that they decide to develop, that the brain itself needs to be trained in that way first? Is that kind of like your stance too?
Not necessarily, the typical framework that I leverage whenever we are solving a problem with LLM or not, I would say is one, we ground ourselves in what is the true customer pain point that we are trying to move the needle on. Two, what North Star metric or what true KPI can we look at to quantify that pain point, and what is the baseline as to where it stands today, and then think about a successful outcome as to, do you want to move that baseline KPI from X to Y, where Y is doubly powerful or Y is significant enhancement over the current X, right? So, and then subsequently you figure out what constitutes the solution or the MVP. And if you're leveraging LLMs, then, you figure out what is the underlying data set you're
I
going to
see.
leverage and things like that, right? And so this is how you come up with an effective needle mover MVP criteria. And then you set the success criteria for that MVP. And while all of this is happening, think of this as a product squad, right? Because you're solving a true product problem. While the product squad is busy creating a compelling value proposition with LLM, solving that equation, you have a parallel squad, which is, let's say, a platform squad, which is thinking through on all of those guardrails that you want in place, right? Like all of those foundational blocks you would like to see in place when you deploy this MVP for your customers, right? And that's where all of the things we were talking about earlier comes into effect. Hey, you know what? How do I govern it? How do I guard it for all the sensitive data? How do I think through on what lineage is there, what privacy safeguards are there, what governance is there, all of those foundational blocks, the platform squad can be solving for it incrementally one by one. So you're kind of making progress from a platform angle on one side, and in parallel, you're solving and creating a value proposition for your customer. So hopefully by the time the product squad is ready with, okay, you know what, we're truly able to move the baseline needle from X to Y. So we have something that is of value. So let's go ahead and launch. And when you launch, you again want to plan for maybe a GA for a handful of customers, and then you want to slowly but steadily ramp it up. So when you do that, you get the platform components in place, and that way you've built a solid foundation on which you can scale. And then it also accelerates your journey for the next product pain point that you're going to solve, because every single aspect of that foundational block you built with the platform squad is going to be reused, right? So that's how I would see it.
Got it. Okay. In terms of maybe like stepping back a little bit, when you talk about kind of like governance, what sort of specific aspects of it is important to have in there?
So I think several different aspects, in my opinion. Everything from fairness metrics, precision metrics, accuracy metrics, your data drift metrics, right? Because over time, for your production scenarios, for your dissection of all customer base, the model could drift, the data could drift, right? And all of that could, if you don't govern it or if you don't measure it, it's going to lead to inconsistency in results, right? So it's unlike you building a product workflow where you have a user experience and the user is just going ahead and using it. A typical application, if you build, it's the consistency is retained because there are no variables, right? Whereas that's not true when it comes to LLMs, when it comes to ML. So you want to actively measure and monitor with the right observability, with the right metrics in all of these dimensions. That's what I mean by governance.
Hi, and I have been through so many code reds, code yellows in the past, or maybe war rooms, I would say, where metrics suddenly dropped, and we look at everything on the planet, and suddenly it's because a feature drifted in a model
Yeah.
that is not evident from, and it didn't raise any alarms because we do have some guardrails set, right? But having them at the right place for the right reasons, oh, so important.
Yeah.
Show up right in front.
Yeah. And just like SDLC, right? The cost of a defect that you plan proactively in your requirements or in your design phase
Yeah.
is a fraction of what you end up paying after it gets launched in production, right? So
Oh,
so the same thing, maybe quadruple the cost for an LLM, because it can go in
Oh
any
yeah.
dimension, right? And the engineer frustration that
it's the Ferrari. What was it? The F1. The car's going to brake with that speed. Oh, it's going to create a lot of havoc.
It's a Waymo in a Formula One.
Yes, that's amazing. I'm going to use this analogy too.
Yeah, and the other important aspect is, see, I value team and team culture quite a bit, right?
Okay.
So imagine the plight of an engineer, a engineer, data science engineer, who is pulled in on a weekend for an incident where the customer has sent out an VOC to the CEO or whoever, right? And now you are at the mercy of not having the right instrumentation and going through the logs and doing this for n different customers who are seeing inconsistent results, right? You do not want that kind of baseline to be set up for your engineers, because it's a thankless job, right? And so makes a ton of sense and efficiency and velocity for us to plan for these platform centric modules right from the word go, and that will save all of us a few stressful moments through the lifespan of that solution in production.
You just talked about years of trauma for a lot of people who go through this stuff. Manoj, though, I'll tell you something. You might have maybe been yourself in startups, or maybe have friends through or consulted startups or something. But it's not, there's always a time crunch, right? Always a time crunch. I have talked to a few people in places. I've myself seen some of it too, is people end up just creating a pipeline for something, and then they create one more, and there are tens and hundreds of it, and you can't make sense of it. The company becomes big, you become like, actually having realized value that is associated to all of these pipelines. They're doing anything, touching any of them into one big, like the project that you're talking about, that's scalable, that's is like shock proof and all of that. There's a lot of projects, or, the products that rely on it need to have a plan B while you work on this. It's a big mess if you want to clean up the mess later on, right? But again, you want to move fast. So what's your approach in a move fast world?
Yeah, so great question. And again, I fully empathize with, with startups and resource constraints and trying to accelerate and everything, now and everything that I'm talking about is also partially from all of my learnings through my journey. If I have to go back and do it, I would change all of this exactly like how I'm saying it today. When it comes to, like LLMs, when it comes to AI, right? I think creating that shiny toy is like you can do it in an instance, right? But you're also setting the wrong expectations as an engineer or as an engineering leader by showing that, hey, you know what? I used an OpenAI embedding model. I used an OpenAI foundational model. Look, I'm able to do this. It's so much better, right? Because you're only looking at that context or that small thing, right? So that's why, that's why the other thing I keep telling my team is, when you think about AI at scale will crack at some time if you don't ground it, right? So it is not going to crack based on what it can or cannot generate, right? Because you give garbage and input to a foundational model, it's still going to come back with something that's relevant, right? So the AI models will always give you some value with what it is able to generate, right? So that is not the breaking factor. But what becomes the breaking factor will be, what it is not grounded on, because even if that's happening for 10% of the scenarios or 20% of the scenarios, it's going to translate into, eroding trust, customers disengaging with the platform and so on.
It's like the elbow curve, right? There is like, yeah, it might look pretty good at the start. And the more there, you might reach to a point where you'll see diminishing of returns. Maybe you're making the framework too perfect for not needed, and you're waiting too long. So what you're talking about, get to the point at least. Don't just, don't just get started without thinking about the implications that you might lead into later. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect from the get-go, right?
Correct. Yeah. So think more structured or organized, right? Like even if you're short on engineers, right? Still think of a product squad, still think of a platform squad, right? Because there is ways for you to modularize ingestion so that will scale better than building individual pipelines, right? So maybe if you're capacity constrained, maybe instead of taking 3 different product pain points, let the product squad start with one pain point, right? And in parallel, let the platform squad, if you need to build 5 different modules, let them start with one module if you're capacity constrained, right? Don't sacrifice your platform squad and get 2 different product squads formed and let them work on 2 different pain points, because then invariably you're going to create, a cost or a pain point later on, right? Because you've solved for 2 of them. You don't have the bells and whistles. You don't have the instrumentation. You're going to get all of this launched, and then all of those engineers are going to work on nights, weekends, whenever customer complaints start coming up, right? So that's
they leave, you get new engineers, you have to onboard them. Yeah, you'll have to go through a different set of mess. So yeah, I totally get it.
And again, I know sitting here, for me to state all of this is a lot easier. So that's why I empathize with startups because some of the problems and some of the acceleration they're trying to create is genuine, but still don't let this get in as a reactive thinking. Think as proactively as possible would be my only recommendation. Yeah.
Makes
That's
sense.
awesome.
Basically, think systems and choose it wisely if you don't have enough people, but never go for like just short terms. And like this is basically an advice that works for almost any discipline, I'd say, right? And yeah, it's been good. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the importance of evals in AI. That's why I captured here. We just had an episode, I think last time, with Aman Khan, who's like the king of evals in the product world. We'll link it here as well. Cool. Awesome. This is great. So, Manoj, if we fast forward to 2030, what do you think a future-proof data organization would look like?
Love this question. Manoj,
You're like the forward-thinking data leader here.
So I think I am a very aspirational person. Everything that I was talking about to the Shravya's question earlier, I would still hold that, right? But I would take it maybe for 2030, I would take it one notch higher. So in my opinion, I think, and at the pace of advancement that we are seeing today, in my opinion, I would say that in 2030, the best of data orgs are going to be super boring in a good way. In a good way. Why do I say that? So this is my aspirational thinking. Even for bigger enterprises, the way I see it is a few years down the line, if I have a problem, like be it a product person, be it the C-level exec, or be it the VP, be it the whoever it is, if I have a problem, I'm going to go to open AI kind of interface, a simple text box. I'm going to ask, okay, how has product engagement changed last week as compared to my 90-day average, right? And it's going to come back saying green, red, yellow. If it says green, I don't look at the numbers, I move on, right? So my aspirational thinking is you have all these systemic capabilities. You have all of the right governance built in. You have embedded AI in every step of that workflow. And between your transactional systems, between your analytical systems, between your dashboards, between your product workflows, all of that AI understands it semantically with the right knowledge map. And any employee within the company, be it the lowest level employee, be it the highest level employee, all of them are able to ask a question. You can ask a summary level question, you can ask a granular question, and the system understands that right level of granularity and comes back with the right level of answers, right? So that's the dream scenario that I envision. So you're not talking about data pipelines, you're not talking about dashboards. You're talking about how am I adding value to the enterprise? How am I adding value to the product or the product sales or whatever equation I am contributing to? And in that context, any data-driven decision, I am not dependent on a data engineer or a data science model, a data scientist model to to build the model, experiment with it, and things like that. I'm able to drive all of that through a seamless interface because the knowledge dissemination within the enterprise has now been systemically baked in and fed to the AI to come back with the relevant results, right? Could be my dream, but
So
I
agents have taken over, basically, in
exactly. That's what I
2030.
was going to say. Manoj, do you know what you just said? What you just said was there's no data scientists, so like analytical engineers.
no
Like
no no
there's
no
no
no. Let me back to that part of the question. So now
obviously.
right, all of this massive problem statements, right? And I like and even for the best of companies, I don't see them getting it right on iteration one, right? It's probably going to take a handful of iterations, but each one of it is a product in itself, in my mind, right? How do you build contextual awareness within an enterprise so that you're able to feed that appropriately to AI, right? That's going to be owned by a team, right? And that team is not going to be focused only on building data pipelines, right? That team has to understand the lay of the land when it comes to information architecture, systems, how to connect those systems, how to integrate them, what's the right push mode or pull mode, APIs, webhooks, how are you going to feed that data, have RAG interfaces, whatever it is, right? So the contextual awareness squad is going to be responsible and should be capable on all of these dimensions, right? So that's one squad. Similarly, you're going to have, LLM prompt tuning or cost optimization squad, which is going to focus on that problem statement, right? And you're going to have other similar squads that are going to solve more centered problems like that, right? So the way I see it, I mean, yes, maybe a lot lesser of data engineers if we get all of those modules right. If we build all of that platform centric mindset, then yes, a lot lesser data scientists, lot lesser data engineers, but they're not, they're not going to sit idle, because they are going to be solving even more bigger problems by understanding the lay of the land, carving out a semantic knowledge map, and things like that, right? So that's how I envision it. I don't see it as a means for folks to not do anything. I think is going to enable all of us to do bigger, broader, more challenging, more exciting work, while AI does all the mundane, routine, repetitive work for us, right? That's the value proposition that we should focus on, in my opinion.
That was a safe answer, Manoj, at the end.
No, 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 absolutely not.
No, I was kidding. I was kidding. But I agree. I know.
I am an eternal optimist.
Shravya spicing things up here in this pod.
Well, the one idea that I was getting, can we envision a scenario like now we know we have companies like Statsig, Apple, where experimentation is outsourced, right? Fully. Can we think of a place, I don't know, maybe there are companies like that and I'm ignorant, where the entire data could be outsourced and basically a platform that just takes your data, ingests it, and just does all of this for you and give it back, probably using LLMs. And you'll not need a data team.
I mean, my 2 cents, I don't buy into that philosophy, and I'll tell you why. So, right? I mean, some of it is bound to happen, right? Like what you said, some of it, there are already products out there that do it, but it'll still be at a more granular level, in my opinion. So, for example, if you have to embed clickstream analytics into every single of your product workflow, you are not going to codify every aspect of it. You're going to leverage a product, a library with 1 or 2 lines of code, and that will enable all clickstream analytics for all your product workflows, right? And similarly, you're going to have, let's say, connectors like Fivetran for seamless connectivity across enterprise systems. You're going to have ingest, or orchestration tools and things like that. However, at the macro level, the problem statement that you're saying, can some external company,
Yeah.
take up all of your data footprint and come back with what is the best value add from that data? Unlikely. Why do I say that? Because you are in the business of creating a compelling value proposition for your customers with your product, right? And that inherent intelligence, you are the thought leader in that aspect, right? So if I built a couple of products for my customers or workflows for my customers, I don't believe there will be anyone else who will have the same level of knowledge or the same depth of knowledge to understand how that can be meaningfully enhanced, right? With the underlying pitfalls, with the underlying glitches, with the underlying data. In that sense, the custodian of creating value, deriving value from data for my footprint of product workflows will always reside within that enterprise, not unlikely to reside outside of the enterprise, is how I see it.
I know. Like there are companies a lot that
Yeah.
are trying to get a part of this, but not
Correct.
fully
Correct.
exactly what I
Yeah.
just said. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of kind of companies attempted to do it, not the entire full life cycle of data, but like, maybe perhaps the insights aspects of it. Like,
Yeah.
tons of companies have tried to automate it since decades ago, and to very little success, I would say. So yeah, no, I buy that. That's cool. All right, cool, Manoj. We're coming up in an hour, actually. Wow, this
Okay.
passed by really fast.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your time and your advice and your thoughts. Any kind of like last minute, maybe perhaps like advice for future data engineering leader, data leader in general? Anything around that?
I mean, essentially, I think everything that we spoke about, I think there is some set of principles that we called out. So maybe one thing I'll call out is, yeah, I think operate always with a set of principles, right? So that you're able to focus on the right priority. So that's maybe one nugget. Another one I would say is, always be willing to learn and unlearn. I have unlearned a bunch of things that I used to work on 10 years back because they are outdated. They're no longer needed. So if I hold on to that philosophy, I'm going to be wrong all the time. So be willing to learn as well as unlearn, and always, have a problem solving mindset, right? Fall in love with the problem, not with the tools, not with the stack, right? I have worked with Informatica in my past life with ETL and things like that. And I don't, probably the footprint of folks who use Informatica today is a lot smaller, right? Because there are more advanced tools, right? So staying focused on the problem and choosing the right tool, I think always helps. The next one I would say is, what you don't measure, you don't know how you're going to improve, right? So whatever it is, and we're talking about data, so this is a given. I think I should not even speak about this, right? You have to speak in outcomes. You have to speak in outcomes meaningfully with a baseline for a pain point or a problem, right? If you can't do that, then you're spending your time on the wrong effort more than likely, right? Yeah, I would say these are the different things that probably you can apply as principles. Yeah, at least it's helped me. So just calling it out. Yeah.
Love
Cool.
that, Manoj. It was great chatting. I think, like you said, almost all of your answers had like frameworks, what to follow and whatnot and stuff. Yeah. It was great having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think both of you asked a lot of interesting, insightful questions. So thank you for all those questions. Great discussion. I did not realize 1 hour go by. I think I was joking with Hi that, we'll wrap it up in 20 minutes. So
We can go on. We can go on forever. Thank you so much again.
yeah.
For our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you're on YouTube or any of the platform, please give us a like if you enjoyed this episode, and leave any comments you have for Manoj or ourselves. We'll get to every single one of them. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you would like to see more content like this in the future. Thanks, everybody.
See you. Bye.